You're watching Cobb TV. I'm Tony Koznick, and with me here is Dave Sherman, our business consultant. Dave is a strategy consultant for big business, and Dave's specialty is sustainability. Dave, I'd like to talk about the big earnings that and bonuses that CEOs are getting. And there's an article here that you brought to my attention by Michael Bush, and it's MSN Money Insight. And I'm going to quote a couple of lines from the article.
Okay, great.
He says that as millions of Americans cope with job losses and struggle to make ends meet, there's been only a little bit of belt tightening in the corner offices. And he says that despite terrible performances that cost lots of jobs and produced huge shareholder losses, hundreds of CEOs pocketed millions in bonus pay last year, thanks to good friends on company boards. Now, everybody is upset about the payout, to keep these banks and institutions and large companies, in many cases, the largest companies functioning, and yet we see terrible performance here, and we see a tremendous amount of money still going into the pockets of these people. What is that? Why is that happening? And how is that happening?
Tony, I think that's a really interesting question. And personally, I've been following this for quite a number of years because earlier in my career, in the early 90s or so, I started to watch how CEO pay was going up. And at that time, I knew some of the compensation consultants that were helping them get the higher pay, and they were working for CEOs. And the whole idea, and our consulting was built around it as well, that companies needed to perform better, and one way to do it would be to link pay to performance. So
right, you get the smartest guy who's had the biggest successes, you pay him the big bucks, and you get him to put his mind power on your business.
Exactly. And then through the 90s, the stock market was booming, and these salaries kept going up. And I had asked myself the question, what's going to happen when this boom stops? Will the pay come back down? Mm-hmm. And it didn't. It didn't nearly enough. And the question is why? Well, in economics, there's a thing called agency theory, and that's basically looks at the power of CEOs and managers working on their own behalf instead of on the company's behalf. And that's basically what's been going on. They have found ways.
Well, how can that go on? I mean, isn't that's as obvious as a guy in a corner store watching a guy walk over to the candy counter and just directly take the candy, stick it in his pocket, and walk out? He saw him do it. How can this go on?
Because they're cleverer than the person in the candy store, basically. The boards are made up of other CEOs that basically are getting paid in a similar manner. And so they're all sort of in it together at one level. And there's tricky ways to be able to say, well, the stock price may have gone down, but other things are going on. For example, I made 5 acquisitions this year. I had to work hard at that. And so what they've done is changed the rules of the game midstream so the CEOs can still get paid well, even though...
Well, what did they change? What rules were there and what changed?
So, for example, some of the pay is linked directly to performance and some is discretionary based on other performance dimensions that may not actually be stock price. And what you're seeing is that the boards those that are getting good bonuses are getting these discretionary bonuses based on the part that isn't linked directly to the stock price.
Well, wait a minute. Why should there be any type of bonus? Again, to me, it's like the guy walks in, steals a candy bar, and says, "I'm stealing the candy bar, and I'll be back tomorrow." This is so obviously not connected to any value for anyone except that individual. It seems verging on illegal. Why is it not?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say that it is verging on illegal, except because those in power can sort of write the rules. They can get away with it at this stage. There's no specific law against it. And the board is the governance body. The governance body is going along with it. And until Congress or somebody writes a rule, that says it's actually illegal, they can get away with it. And that's basically what we're seeing.
So, then nobody really understands how this game is played. I mean, we all agree that there is such a thing as money, and that these guys know how to create this money. And if they say that that's the rules of the game, we're trusting that in the end we're also going to get our share. So we don't really care how this goes, and we can't look into it too closely, or we won't look into it too closely. Is it connected to a reality, or is it completely some game that where they can make up the rules completely? Won't there become a point where people like our viewers just say, I don't want to play that game anymore?
And I think we're seeing some backlash on that right now. The Obama administration, for example, is trying to have some backlash in the banking industry. They've been able to do it where the government has given money to various banks. They've been able to now start to say there's got to be a pullback on compensation. In some cases, the banks have repaid the loans so that they aren't really under this rule. But basically, what I've observed is that the executives are several steps ahead of those trying to regulate them, and they've got the best consultants working for them on pay and other things, and they're basically
Yes.
have all the incentive to enrich themselves.
Yes, this fits really concisely and precisely with what we learn from principles of nature that are revealed to us in the wisdom of Kabbalah. We see that the way in which humanity has been evolving has been based on one particular quality, which is really a quality that is opposite to nature. It's really opposite to the well-being of ourselves and of society as a whole. And it really has to undergo a change. But until it expands this quality, which is basically the quality of self-concern, until it expands to such a degree that it becomes evident to everybody that it really is the thing that needs to change, that our well-being depends on functioning not in terms of self-interest. It has to become painful enough and painfully evident enough that we start asking ourselves, really, what is it in us that needs to change?
It's interesting, Tony. I would also mention that I think a lot of the CEOs, despite they're not getting good performance, actually believe that they deserve this pay. So I don't think...
Of course they believe it. We believe it because this aspect of us is constantly under development, even to the point of, if you could step to the side and take a look at this behavior, you would see how completely outrageous it is. But because as a whole, all of us are developing along these lines until we come to see we're at a dead end. I mean, obviously, we can no longer function this way against nature. The entire system will, and in fact, at the moment is, falling apart. Not only are there big tectonic shifts financially from the Western countries to China, there is also no linkage between these two things. There are huge, huge changes happening within us, and we're seeing that none of the rules of the game, never mind just these guys, but the rules by which we relate to each other, none of them are working anymore. But until we start seeing it as outrageously as you're pointing out, we aren't going to take any steps.
It's interesting. I see in my work some groups of people that are becoming more conscious of that, and in fact, some on the pay side have really scaled back. Warren Buffett, for example, although he's quite wealthy through his stock prices, only draws a salary of $100,000 a year. So compared to other executives that are performing much worse than him from a salary standpoint and a bonus standpoint, Warren Buffett is much more linked to at least his contribution. But there was a very interesting article in The Economist, the recent issue, and they had done some research on the psychology of people that are making a lot of money and being successful, and there's an entitlement mentality that comes through psychologically. And the basic idea is that CEOs, who are people that have been used to earning a lot begin to start to feel entitled to this
Yes.
level of compensation, even if and make excuses. And the board is in the same sort
Yes.
of mindset.
You know, the nature is structured in such a way that this thing called self-concern, which in Kabbalah we call a vessel of reception, the will to receive, that this desire can never ever be fulfilled. It's actually made so that as soon as the fulfillment comes into our desire to fulfill ourselves, it immediately extinguishes that impulse that gives us pleasure from it. And if it doesn't continue to expand, we can't feel anything. So entitlement is a natural outgrowth of a principle of nature. The place in which we can actually reach this sort of sustainability is that we really have to wish to receive only on behalf of other people. This is completely and totally against our nature, and it is precisely where we're going. So sustainability, I don't know if that makes sense to you as a businessman, but in a sense, it is a kind of a model of sustainability. That is, whatever I receive as an executive is to make sure that everybody who I am executive over, like a force of nature, like wind, like sun, gets. I only receive this power of sunlight in order to make sure that all of the plants and all of the animals and all of these things receive precisely what they need. This is the way that life is actually built. It's not mysticism.
Right.
I mean, it's just good business. It's like good health. It's good sense.
Exactly. Well, traditional business, at least in the vantage point that I have, is in many respects sees itself as disconnected from society and really focused on how do we increase money for our shareholders, and really not conscious of all of the interlinkages and the unintended consequences on the earth and on other people. But more and more businesses starting to understand that they need a healthy society to flourish as a business.
Yes, and what nature tells us is that what we need is a healthy, inner, sincere, wholehearted attitude, because there's nothing external that is going to make us make that reconnection to society. Only this sort of inner desire that has to evolve in a person. We've seen it in other systems and other money systems and other political systems, and we see that it doesn't work. The only place it's going to work is when the heart and intention of a person really changes. And I thank you for joining us today, Dave, and for pointing out those things that help us show where we really are. And we're going to sign out now. See you again with Dave later.